A prisoner is strapped to a table, conscious, fully aware. The doctors begin cutting. No anesthesia. They want to see what plague does to a man's organs while he's still alive. This is Unit 731, Japan's secret biological warfare program. And what they did makes the Nazi doctors at Nuremberg look like amateurs. World War II will always be remembered as a war against humanity. When people hear crimes against humanity, most immediately think of Nazi Germany, the Nuremberg trials, the concentration camps, the death camps. Many of those on trial were doctors who performed horrific experiments: eugenics, torture, vivisections without anesthesia, high-altitude decompression tests, hypothermia experiments, infectious disease studies. But few people are aware of what the Japanese were also doing for a much longer period of time and with an even larger human population to work on. What was Unit 731? What was their actual purpose? What did they do that was so horrific? Was anyone involved held accountable, as the Germans were? And what do the Japanese of today think about these men? The beginning. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria and for many years established a strong presence in northern China. Later, as they invaded China proper and then continued throughout Asia and the Pacific Islands, the brutality of the Japanese army became legendary. In 1937, Unit 731 was created as a medical engineering unit responsible for testing, producing, and storing biological weapons, as well as using these on humans to test theories and develop vaccines and treatments. It was under the direct command of General Shiro Ishii, a well-known microbiologist. The unit was based near the northeastern Chinese city of Harbin, just north of the Korean peninsula, bordering the Soviet Union. The harvest. Once most of China had fallen, the army was under orders to harvest the people for forced labor, execution, and upwards of 500,000 or more for medical experiments. Many were injected with venereal diseases to examine their spread. They were injected with bubonic plague, cholera, bombarded with intense radiation, subjected to amputations to study blood loss, and other horrific experiments. Many people were intentionally infected with gangrene to test remedies, as the Japanese did not have penicillin. Many were sealed into bunkers and killed with a variety of poisonous gases to learn their effects. There was the removal of various body parts and internal organs, while some subjects were still alive. Intentional starvation, deliberate exposure to freezing temperatures to examine the effects of frostbite and hypothermia, and many were infected with yellow fever and malaria to examine the results and study the efficacies of alternative medications as opposed to using quinine. Beyond the compound. Not all of these experiments were isolated within the Unit 731 compound and facilities. It was decided that a larger pool of test subjects was needed. The most dangerous forms of parasite-hosted diseases, such as bubonic plague, anthrax, and other lethal pathogens, were dropped in canisters on the nearby towns of Changde and Ningbo to assess the results of biological warfare. The effects were horrific. Men, women, and even children were used as guinea pigs. These activities were outlawed by the Hague Convention of 1907 and the Geneva Protocol on the use of biological weapons in 1925, later incorporated into the entire Geneva Convention of 1929 as a result of using various gases in World War I. The victims, not just Chinese, were victims. There were untold thousands of Koreans. Russian civilians and prisoners of war were used as lab rats. American prisoners, mostly downed aircrew, were also victims. Using these biological weapons was not to be restricted to Asia. There was a plan to release canisters of fleas containing bubonic plague in San Diego, California, from submarine-launched aircraft. But the war ended before that could be executed. The mission was codenamed Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, covering the tracks. After Japan surrendered, General Ishii ordered the destruction of Unit 731, which included more than 150 buildings, all the laboratories, and the 2 adjacent airports, as Allied forces closed in. Many hundreds of prisoners, and some believe as many as several thousand, who had survived up to that time, were immediately killed. Ishii wanted no living witnesses. Japan never signed or ratified Geneva 1929, but that did not absolve them of the responsibility of adhering to the laws in force at that time. Japan violated every provision of the laws of warfare until they were finally defeated in 1945. But few people were ever held accountable, and no one from Unit 731 ever stood trial, much like the deals made with top Nazi doctors and scientists. The bargain. The men of Unit 731 and their senior officers and scientists were protected. The researchers at Unit 731 had maintained very detailed records of their experiments and used them as bargaining chips, just like many Germans did. Ironically, General Ishii kept a detailed diary during his entire military service, including his work in China, but there is no reference to any of his time commanding Unit 731 or its activities. That alone illustrates that he knew what he was doing was illegal and a violation of his oath as a physician. Ishii and his men in U.S. custody managed to avoid being charged with crimes against humanity and placed on trial, unlike their brethren who had murdered Allied POWs in the occupied regions under Japanese influence. Why? This was due to the fact that Ishii and his associates received immunity from prosecution for war crimes. Why? Because the U.S. wanted their research for its own use in the U.S. biological warfare program, and to keep many of the documents and the years of incredible data out of the hands of the Russians. This was sanctioned all the way up the American chain of command, from the General Staff all the way up. Their primary catalyst for this was Edwin Hill, the chief of the Biological Warfare Laboratory at Fort Detrick, Maryland. After reviewing the thousands of pages from Unit 731's files, he stated in his secret report from 1946 that the information was absolutely invaluable. It could have never been obtained in the United States because of scruples attached to experiments on humans, and the information was obtained fairly cheaply. The deal. On May 6, 1947, General Douglas MacArthur wrote to President Harry S. Truman and the Judge Advocate General's office that additional data, possibly some statements from Ishii, probably could be obtained by informing the Japanese involved that the information would be retained in intelligence channels and would not be employed as war crimes evidence. Basically, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. As a result, the horrors perpetrated by Unit 731 never became public knowledge in the West until recently, although some information was gathered by the Soviets, who placed several Unit 731 personnel on trial at the Khabarovsk war crimes trials. The silence. The Japanese themselves knew nothing about this unit and its activities for decades. In fact, its existence was even denied, and it is not taught in schools, nor are any other Japanese war crimes. This was only possible due to the protection the United States government gave to Ishii and his men, keeping the story secret as a reward for gathering all their medical research. Primary Japanese war criminals such as Hideki Tojo were put on trial at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, better known as the Tokyo War Crimes Trials. Testimony from General Ishii, taken from his post-war interrogation in Maryland, was submitted as evidence. But Ishii and his officers, doctors, and scientists were never charged with war crimes. The reunion. In another incredible sense of irony, the surviving members of Unit 731 held annual reunions, gatherings where they came together in mutually respected comradeship. General Dr. Shiro Ishii retired rather comfortably. He died in Tokyo on October 9, 1959, from laryngeal cancer at the age of 67. Prior to his death, he was baptized into the Catholic faith by Dr. Hermann Huvers, the former president of Sophia University in Tokyo, whom Ishii had known before the war. His funeral was chaired by Lieutenant General Dr. Masaji Kitano, his second-in-command at Unit 731. The irony continues. And the irony continues. Kitano was one of the founders of the Japanese pharmaceutical company and first commercial blood bank, the Green Cross, which was renamed Welfide in 1998 and became part of Mitsubishi Pharma in 2001. Kitano died on May 19, 1986. He was never charged with a crime either, the reckoning, or lack thereof. But in 2018, things began to change, and the Japanese government seemed to be acknowledging part of its violent past. As it happens, people talk. And as the men involved with Unit 731 grew older, a few probably decided that they could live no longer with their conscience. The government provided a list of names of more than 3,600 members of Unit 731 to a Japanese scholar for his research. Much of this forthrightness was due to intense pressure from China and South Korea, both nations with their own databases on Unit 731 and its activities over the years. As more information emerged, it became harder for Japan to ignore its past and hide the truth. A confession. For example, in 1995, an article in the New York Times published the comments from a medical assistant assigned to Unit 731 under Ishii. To quote the article, the Chinese prisoner had been deliberately infected with the plague as part of a research project, the full horror of which is only now emerging, to develop plague bombs for use in World War II. After infecting him, the researchers decided to cut him open to see what the disease does to a man's insides. No anesthetic was used. The former medical assistant said this was out of concern that it might have an effect on the results. Remember this. So remember, at least the Germans apologized for what their previous government did to the peoples of Europe. Japan has never made such an overture. Thank you for watching. Please click like, subscribe, and share. Send us comments and show ideas, and we will get back to you as soon as possible.